What up, y'all? Sitting there, uh, looking at this, looking at this, this hearing, right? With Ashleigh Merchant, and give me a second. All right, so, what's up, everybody? So, I'm looking at this whole situation. Let me turn this light on. Pardon me. Looking at this situation with Ashleigh Merchant. So, Ashleigh Merchant, she's a good lawyer. Very, very good. She is being questioned by Senate, and you notice when the older gentleman, the first gentleman who's questioning her, he's more so kind of like catering to a lot of the things that she's saying, and it's almost like he's answering, like finishing her line of statements on a lot of things that she's saying. So I'm looking at that and I'm like, wow, okay, well, if it was this gentleman right here and it was solely up to him, there's a good chance that Miss Merchant would be favored by this gentleman. But still, there's a group of individuals publicly who have to select and choose, especially for trial, if Mr. Wade and Mrs. Willis is found guilty, right? I looked at how the judge, right? Let me look at this judge. I looked at how the judge questioned both the state and defense, right? The judge, I do want to say, is very fair. Very, very fair. And the questions that he's asking, one of the main things that I noticed that the judge mentioned was burden of proof. That's something that he emphasized on a lot. Now, the judge in this case is Scott McAfee, right? Scott McAfee is, I like Scott. Right now, this is the thing. A lot of people are kind of like on the fence because they're like, he's a Republican, but he's a Republican who used to work under Fonnie Willis. You understand that? And he has a lot of respect for Fonnie. A lot of these people already know Fonnie Willis. Like, a lot of them know her personally. So this is kind of hard for people when they're trying to convict or find guilt, rather, right? So it's very conflicting for a lot of people. It's funny because, with a case of this stature, and a woman like Fonnie who has brought in so many cases for Atlanta, Fulton County, she has a lot of favor. Meaning, okay, yes, it seems like they're attacking her and they're going after her, they're trying to take her out, but favor in the fact of people know the work that she's done. People know how capable she is. People know how much work she's done for Georgia, how much she's trying to clean up Georgia. And just off of that, a lot of people respect her. Now, okay, Mr. McAfee, right? Or Mr. McAfee. So we have Honorable Judge Scott McAfee, right? So now let's look up the Senate. Let's look up the Senate, right? Because this gentleman who was questioning Mrs. Merchant, oh man. That senator, yo, he was tough on Miss Merchant. He's tough. He's tough. I'm trying to find his name, but either way, what he was saying to Miss Merchant was, you stated to us that they were going on lavish trips, lavish vacations. They were spending large amounts of money. And then he says to her, how many trips did they go on? Oh, they went on 6 trips, and this was over the course of, this is about a 3-year period. Could have been possibly more. He said, all right. And how much was spent on these trips? She said around $20,000. So he corrects her. He says, well, no, the actual amount is 17.5. And then he says to her, how much money does Mrs. Willis make every year? She was like, well, I believe around like 200,000 or more. So then, basically he's lining her up with those series of questions, right? You're saying that so then he comes back. He says, so what you're stating in this case is that Mrs. Willis and Mr. Wade were conspiring together to set up these large cases so they can get big paydays and then that they can go on these lavish trips, right? So then Ashleigh Merchant says, yeah, that's basically what I'm saying. So he says to her, do you know what the average spending amount is for a family that's going on vacation in the United States? Setting her up again. She's like, no, I don't believe I looked. He said, well, being that you speculated a lot, I'm going to speculate and say that you did look it up. That's why you didn't put it in your reporting. He said, but I'm going to just tell you, the average spending amount for a family of 4 is around $3,500. So then her rebuttal is, Ms. Merchant's rebuttal is, oh, well, this wasn't a family of 4, sir. This is only 2 people. And his whole point is, which she obviously didn't get by making that statement, his whole point is $3,500 is not a lot for 2 people, especially if just one person makes over $200,000 a year. Like, that's not lavish. Like, the fact that there were 6 trips in the course of 2 to 3 years, if it was 3 years, then that's 2 trips a year from 2020 up until now. And we can really say last summer of 2023, they stopped dealing with each other. So let's say for 2 trips a year, $17,500 that's not even $3,000 a trip. They're spending $2,500, $2,700 a trip, but they're considering that to be lavish, and they're going after her for having a private relationship with a public worker that works under her that she hired. It's just like, now, how did Ashleigh Merchant and Mr. Merchant meet? How did Mr. and Mrs. Merchant meet? How did she meet her husband? Because they're both on this case. How did she meet her husband? I'm pretty sure Mr. McAfee, Judge McAfee, is not really pressed off of this whole relationship thing. And I could tell that just based upon the answers that he gave when the state were making their case against the defense. I could tell that by the questions that he asked. You know, the burden of proof. How can you prove this? But can you prove that? You know, that was one of his main lines of questions. But is that proven? Can you prove that? Because if you can't prove it, we don't want to speculate. And that's something that I realized that this senator was doing at the Senate hearing with Miss Ashleigh Merchant. Where's the conflict? Can you prove it? We need to see it. Prove to us that there's a conflict. Show us the conflict. And I feel like Miss Merchant can't show us the conflict. Her client, right? She mentioned, Miss Merchant mentioned something about running up hours, right? Her client was slated to be charged with something. She wanted it dismissed. They came to her with an offer and just paid this amount. So she's saying that they're running up hours in the law office, trying to make thousands and thousands of dollars off of cases that really don't need that much hours committed to it. And what the senator said was, well, if you felt like they were running up the hours and they offered your client a plea deal, why didn't you just take the plea deal? Why did you keep fighting it, saying that you wanted a dismissal? You actually created a conflict that you're stating they created by allowing them to continue to bill the case and continue to add hours onto the case because you didn't want to take the plea. They would have gave your client could have walked away. There's a contradiction. So he allowed herself to answer questions to line herself up to admit that she contradicted herself. He also lined her up to admit that even though these trips were averaged $2,500 to $3,000 over the course of 3 years, Miss Willis does make over $200,000, and she wouldn't have to go and request all this money from the special committee. She wouldn't have to request all of this money just to go and try all of these big cases, to go on lavish trips that equaled up to $17,000. So the Senate was able to make Miss Merchant look like she was contradicting herself. Also, the fact that Miss Merchant didn't have a lot of solid facts, and she kept saying things like, I think, I believe, and you're in front of a Senate, you're in front of the Georgia Senate. You can't say things like, I believe. You just have to know. If you don't have the facts in front of you, if you don't have the paperwork in front of you in black and white, and this hasn't been proven, then you're speculating. And because of those speculations, that senator was able to call her out on those speculations. It's on paper that he considered her to be speculating throughout the course of her testimony during that Senate hearing. That senator also allowed people to see that Miss Merchant contradicted herself by saying that they caused the conflict, that, hey, this is one of my points of why Mrs. Willis and Mr. Wade caused the conflict. Their office kept billing hours and hours and hours for this, but at the same time, when they offered you a plea, you turned the plea down. The hours could have stopped there. The hours could have stopped. But because you didn't want to turn the plea down and you then wanted to fight and press on past the plea, now you create more hours. Now they have a reason to build more hours. How is that a conflict that they created? You're actually, the same conflict that you're saying that they created, you're feeding into it. You're helping it. Crazy situation, but give me some time. I'll be back to break more down. Love, life, and loyalty is the motto. Stay safe, stay real, and stay true. You rock with me, I rock with you. Peace.